Hi everyone, thank you for joining. My name is Pratima Rodriguez and I'm the founder of Trubay India. Trubay is India's first homegrown Indian owned Ashtanga Yoga premium workshop and retreat organizer, bringing top international Ashtanga Yoga teachers to India since January 2019. Welcome to episode 9 of Conversations Beyond Asanas with Ty Landrum. Ty Landrum is the director of the yoga workshop in Boulder, Colorado. He teaches Ashtanga Vinyasa in the traditional, contemplative, and experimental style of his mentors, Mary Taylor and Richard Freeman. With a PhD in philosophy, Ty has a special touch for explaining the theory of yoga with color and creativity. His passion as a teacher is to share the brilliance of yoga with anyone who wants to learn. Ty has been an Ashtanga practitioner since 2005. He was introduced to the method by Jennifer Elliott at Ashtanga Yoga Charlottesville, where he practiced for 7 years. In 2012, after completing a doctoral degree in philosophy from University of Virginia, Ty moved to Boulder to study with Mary Taylor and Richard Freeman. Since then, under their guidance, he has learned some unspeakably wonderful things about the art of yoga. Ty teaches extensively around the world and is soon restarting his Mysore program in Boulder on October 5th with COVID-19 protocols in place. Ty's physical practice is unreal. That's the only word I can find. He flows with so much grace and strength, Shiva and Shakti, as they say. His Instagram is beautiful to look at. But what is even more beautifully profound are his captions and writings on his blogs. They are deep and cut through your soul. I've had the joy of practicing with Ty in Boulder a few years back, and even though my physical asana practice looked pretty clumpy, Ty made me feel absolutely comfortable and met me where I was at my practice. I was so amazed at his easy and down-to-earth nature and deep knowledge of a student's body. Ty is a teacher you don't want to miss the opportunity to practice with. Ty lives in Boulder, Colorado with his wife and 2 children, and together with his sister, they run a Mysore program, which is restarting on October 5th, as I mentioned, at the Shambhala Center. I'm delighted to welcome Ty as my guest on Conversations Beyond Asanas. Allow me a minute while I add Ty onto the chat. Hi, Ty. Good to see you.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm sorry I dragged you out of bed so early in the morning.
Oh no, I was up.
So for everyone who's joined, it's 6:30 a.m. for Thai, and it's 6 p.m. here in India. So I'm really sorry once again. Time zones, notwithstanding, it's good to see you.
It's great to see you too, Pratima.
Is my sound and everything okay?
Yeah, how about mine?
Yeah, it's your internet connection is a bit
Oh, let me just make sure that I'm on the Wi-Fi. If you give me just one moment.
Sure.
I am, so I think that's as good as it's gonna get.
Okay, all right. So we'll just jump right in,
Sure.
and let's get started. So you were born in 1975. So tell me a bit about your childhood, about your family, where you grew up. Let's start from there.
Well, I don't know if any of that's terribly interesting, but I grew up mostly in South Florida, in a very beautiful place surrounded by, the beauty of nature. And I spent a lot of time on the water, in the ocean, surfing, diving. sailing. Um, my father was really big into these things, so I remember that.
Just a second, Ty. Someone's saying that your voice is not audible.
Ah,
So you may need to.
let me put my earbud in. Maybe that's
Okay,
helpful.
okay.
Let's see if this is better. Just make sure it's connected.
Sure.
Okay, I'm just going to turn around too because I'm realizing that if I don't, my very old iPhone might quickly run out of battery. Still getting new to all this. Okay, wait a second. Stay there. Zach.
No worries. Take your time.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Someone's saying yoga teachers have to be so tech savvy these days. We appreciate the
Yeah,
effort. Yeah.
and I am not.
But we're good. So that's yeah, you were saying that you grew up in South Florida surfing and your dad was into this.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point is just that the beauty of, I've always been blessed to live in very naturally beautiful places. Um, I've lived in South Florida, in the mountains of Virginia, in Seattle, and now in Boulder. And so I feel like I've really been, I've had the great privilege of being nourished by natural beauty wherever I've been, and I'm really grateful for that. Um, so,
So you have a sister who I've met in Boulder, and who else was is constituted your family while growing up?
well, I have a younger sister whom you met, and also an older sister, both pretty close in age. So.
Okay, and what took you to Seattle from South Florida?
I went there to study philosophy.
So you did your graduate school in Seattle, and then you moved for your doctorate program to University of Virginia.
Yeah.
Okay, how did yoga? What was spirituality and movement practice for you? While growing up. Well, how did what was what was religion for you growing up?
Well, my mother was a Baha'i, so and if you know anything about that, it's a sort of spiritual perspective that is very much embracing of all other spiritual perspectives, and so I used to watch my mom pray and sit in silence, and sometimes I would sit with her, and that all had a very profound influence on me. And so I remember from a very young age just this idea that this feeling that sort of my mother was sort of communing in some way with higher forces, and and that I could sort of sit there with her and in a certain sense be in communion also. And then I think I really lost a sense of that going into my teens and into my early 20s. And life became, my early 20s became very difficult. There were the deaths of a few people that were closest to me, and at the same time I went to study philosophy, and I was looking for I was looking for something. I was looking for, something that had been lost, something that I felt had been sort of taken from me. I felt a sense of isolation and alienation. And so I was reading, especially the ancients. Ancient Greek philosophers were a big influence on me. And I became very absorbed in that sort of intellectual world. And I think that it increased my sense of isolation and alienation quite a lot. And I was very taken by these ideas, especially that you find in Plato and in some of the philosophers that were influenced by Plato, of communing with absolute elements of reality, and of coming into immediate contact with the source of beauty and the source of truth. And yet there was no sense in what anything that I could read or anything that I could come in contact with in academia about how one does that. It was just sort of theoretical or philosophical reflection on what that was like and what that could do for you, but there was no sense of anyone actually doing that that I could tell from the people around me. And so during that time, I think a lot of my own sort of spiritual communion had to do with the solitary time in natural places, and I would seek out wilderness areas. We have beautiful wilderness areas in the United States. I was very into backpacking for a while, and to me that meant going usually alone, sometimes with one other person, for sometimes weeks on end, to the most far out, isolated, remote place that we could find. And you can find some pretty remote places in the US. And so we would do that, and I would often sit for long periods in these extremely quiet places, having seen no one for days on end, and I had no formal meditation training or anything, but I was just drawn to sit and to listen, and that was very nourishing.
So communing with nature really sort of helped you heal parts of yourself that you were looking to heal.
Very much so, very much so. It would give me a sense of being grounded, of being sort of connected, of being less isolated, less alienated somehow, in ways that were difficult for me to express, but I felt very sort of retuned, reset during those times. So, but then I would go back. The academic year was
Sorry, Ty, I'm going to be a pain, but your audio is really low.
Really low?
Okay. Yeah, I think you'll have
to
speak up.
Yeah,
you just have to speak up. Yeah,
sure.
I don't know whether you're speaking softly because you don't want to wake up your household or
no. No, I had to leave the household to come, so I'm in a different place.
Okay.
Yeah. So the academic year would begin again, and I would have my head back in the book studying, and that sense of isolation would just immediately come back in, and it would be once again I would feel very desolate. And so it was right when I finished my master's degree in Seattle. I went to Charlottesville, Virginia, to commence the PhD program, and I started yoga on the recommendation of a friend at the same time, and I was astonished that immediately I felt that same sort of sense of communion, that sense that I had of sort of communing with nature, and the way that felt in my body, the sense of balance and the sense of connection that I felt in this visceral way. When I had spent all this time in the mountains, I was feeling that immediately through the practice of yoga. and that was quite unexpected, and of course, absolutely delightful and intriguing. So I was drawn in immediately by that.
What was your growing up as somebody in in North America, what was your exposure to yoga prior to you getting introduced to a yoga class? What was yoga like, or what did you think of yoga, or where did you hear about, besides your friend, had you heard about yoga?
Sure. Yeah, I had heard about it, and I didn't think much of it. I thought that it was a little absurd, to tell you the truth, and that it had nothing to do with me. I associated it with, I don't know, with middle-aged women, who sort of. I associated it with false spirituality, to tell you the truth. So
Yeah.
because my perception was all of sort of popular. Popular yoga. I would sort of, walking in the streets in Seattle, there were many yoga studios. So, I would see the sort of, the shiny clothes, and it seemed like pageantry to me,
Mm. Mm.
and just sort of a way to, to do fitness, to practice fitness somehow, sort of wrapped up in a sort of um, some garb of false spiritualism, to make it somehow more appealing to a certain kind of person that I didn't really connect with. So I was really, when a friend of mine said, there's this, my first yoga teacher in Virginia was a friend of a friend. And so he said, you're moving to Virginia, you're moving to Charlottesville, you've got to, go by and take a class from, whatever you think about yoga, just set it aside and go take this, go see my friend, go see Jennifer Elliott is her name. And so I did, and to tell you the truth, I did, because I was struggling with depression by that point. And he said that it would help, and I sort of had gotten to the point where I was willing to try most anything, because it had been years, it had been a long time, and I hadn't been able, none of my self-medication techniques were really helping. So, so I went, and it's kind of the cliched story, the yoga teacher. I went to my first yoga class and fell immediately in love, but it was like that, and it was also extremely painful.
Why is that?
It was, it was. I mean, from the first time, that I took a yoga class, and it was a full primary series, which was just like, if you walk off the street and do a full primary series class, it's so unreasonable. So I think there was part of it that was kind of exciting. Like, I can't believe what they're asking me to do. Like, this is so extreme and kind of raw, and, it was so far beyond the sort of tame, idea of what yoga was. I thought we'd be like reaching our arms out to the side and taking easy breaths and
Passive stretching,
picturing rainbows or something. Yeah. So
unicorns.
I was just, there I was, sort of panting in a puddle on the ground, and I was like, wow, this is this is not what I expected. But it was also, I think, especially from all of the sort of heart-opening gestures, which is not something that I had. It's almost like I hadn't moved my body in that way probably since I had been, a teenager, perhaps even younger or something. So it immediately gave me all of these really strong childhood memories, and sort of these strong sensations in my body that I felt, that I hadn't really felt since I had been a child. And, kind of this sense of, it awakened this sense of vitality that I had not felt in so many years. At the same time, it brought immediately to the surface all of this grief and anguish that I'd been holding since, the death of some loved ones. And I also understood on some level that this would be extraordinarily cathartic. like nothing I had encountered up to that point. Um, so, um, I went back the next day.
So you mentioned that you found you were struggling from depression. You had you had grief which hadn't been resolved within you, and that all came to the surface. It's something that I think I wanted to touch upon the fact that, do you think that a lot of times with yoga, when a practitioner comes into, a beginner comes in, they don't realize, or they're not given enough information that yoga brings up, you know, unresolved grief, trauma, all of that. And therefore, one needs to be prepared for whatever comes with it. And it's only sometimes after years of practice you realize that all of that, anger that came out after a class was actually something that was healing within your system. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, that's a very interesting suggestion, that if the question is sort of, do we owe it to students to explain to them, what the dangers are, so to speak, or the potency of the practice? Well, I mean, yeah, perhaps so. Perhaps so. Because I think certainly it can be. I mean, look, I'm sure that there are so many people who are listening to us right now that know that yoga is so often just too much. Like, it's a bit too much. And I really believe that it's supposed to be a bit too much. It's supposed to be more than you can manage, more than you can handle, more than you can cope with, because it's precisely by sort of, testing the sort of going just over the edge of what you can cope with, that you sort of finally let go of trying to cope, trying to handle, trying to manage and control and organize your experience, so that, finally those energies that you're sort of holding in a certain psychical space are allowed to flow and are allowed to move, and that's such a potent moment when those energies start to flow, when those emotions and when those memories start to come unearthed from the soil of the subconscious mind, and when they start to sort of move, from places of density in the body. This can be, it can be extremely exhilarating, and it can be dangerous. And I think that's what you're sort of pointing to, that it can be dangerous in a way, because one might not be ready to, to feel that intensity of sensation, to feel that intensity of emotion, or just to sort of be faced once again with some kind of formerly repressed memory that you might not even know that you had. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess it is important for people to sort of understand, just what it is that you're signing up for when you go into yoga. And I do believe, also on that note, that when you sort of, sign up, so to speak, that is when you start practicing seriously, and you start reflecting on the insights of yoga, and you start reflecting on ideas like, sort of emptiness of the individual self, or the projected character of the individual self, the importance of letting go, etc. The world will start to present to you situations that invite you to rise to whatever insight you've been contemplating. That's an extraordinary thing, but that's how it is. It works like that. And so, you sort of, in a certain way, as you go down this path of yoga, things can become very, very difficult, but the idea is that you are evolving through those difficulties, that those difficulties are there to sort of tease out, to sort of invite you to embody the various insights that you might have sort of touched here and there in your yoga practice. because the psyche wants to integrate those insights. It wants to be whole. So and because of that, it magnetizes situations to it that give you the opportunity to embody, what you're sort of slowly, dimly realizing. But to realize that is just to realize that the world is totally enchanted, and that it's trying to teach you something, that the whole drift of your experience in your life is, this sort of, this journey, this odyssey that has, not just some moral to it, but that is just sort of brimming over with various insights and opportunities to sort of not just realize those on an intellectual level, but to start to embody them.
So when you mentioned that you found the experience of yoga cathartic, for a beginner, walk us through what were those emotions that came up? What was it that
Well, I think it's, I mean, that's quite personal, and that's okay, because I don't.
If you're okay to share,
Sure. I mean, but I think what's important for us to understand is that it can be so different, from person to person. That what comes up is, so there's my own experience, and then there are the experiences that I've had the great privilege of being sort of witness to in, various students and, fellow practitioners. And, for me, it was grief. For me, it was really, that was what I was holding, in the beginning. And that's, sort of grief. And then within grief, because I was holding so tightly to grief, I was obviously like holding very tightly to this grieving figure, this person, who, had suffered a certain kind of circumstance. And so I saw myself that way. And that's of course a form of attachment, to a particular story. And we all attach to very different stories. I mean, I know people and often these things, sometimes they come up very early in yoga. Sometimes it takes years.
That's true.
And of course you find that as you move along down the path in yoga, things keep coming up from the depths. It's not like I mean, the worst are these sort of these stories that we can easily become attached to as yogis, that somehow we went through this great ordeal and now, we've arrived somehow. We're sort of, cleansed or purified or liberated or something. I mean, to think that about yourself is to become attached to the most dangerous kind of story, a sort of, heroic, spiritualized ego. So, one has to sort of be vigilant against the part of the mind that keeps wanting to tell some kind of, story of success. So when I'm telling you these stories, this is success at dealing in a certain chapter, but the story goes on.
Yeah.
It's definitely still happening, although the material is different. The emotions that come up, the memories, the dynamic, changes from year to year. But it can be grief, it can be shame, it can be just sort of, trauma of things that happened very long ago, and often it's things that you don't even remember. And so this is extraordinary, and this is, one of the reasons that it can be so, unsettling to go down the path of yoga, is that it can sort of it can make you remember things that you didn't know you remembered. You didn't know you had that memory down in your body, but it comes up because it's so incoherent, or it's so sort of orthogonal to the story that you tell yourself about who you are and what you remember and what's happened to you,
Yeah.
And so when you start to let go of that story, you kind of, you kind of realize that, like, oh, that story, it's in constant flux, you know. I mean, you ask me tomorrow about my childhood, and I'll tell you something else. So it's
Yeah.
always changing, and yet
Correct.
you sort of hold on to that story in a certain way, and so there are certain kinds of memories that just don't fit into that. You know, like you don't see yourself as, you know, I don't know, so, you know, maybe something that's very stigmatized, like sexual trauma is a big one. That comes up a lot in yoga, right? And because oftentimes we don't want to see ourselves as victims of sexual trauma. And so we might even kind of, it's almost like the intellect, like, yeah, there was this thing that happened. I don't really contemplate it that much, but like, I'm not a victim of sexual trauma. And then, you know, you start to do yoga, and then the visceral memory of that and the trace of trauma that it left on your body suddenly becomes vivid to you. And, you know, my God, there's this deep imprint. This memory that is coloring all of my experience in the way that I interact with a certain kind of other person, with men, say, or with women, or men that look a certain way, or whatever, you know, with father figures, with uncles, whatever it might be, right? And, you know, you realize that there's this very deep imprint in your subconscious mind that's really impacting the way that you perceive the world. So the yoga brings that to the surface. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. I cut you.
I was just gonna say, because, you know, we're talking so much about the trauma coming up and how, you know, how it can sort of give you a greater transparency on yourself, and also when you get greater transparency on yourself, if in order to integrate that, you have to let go of the idea that your idea of yourself is going to be very coherent and simple and sort of novel-like, as if you're the protagonist of a story that has a definite beginning and an end.
Yeah.
And you can flip through the pages and there's not going to be more text written in, because it's not like that. It's more like an oral story where there are hundreds and hundreds of variations, and people are still writing them all the time. You know, and so to sort of let go of that, you know, that sort of mode of thinking that is so uncomfortable with contradiction, uncomfortable with, you know, sort of with an idea of a person that is itself very multidimensional, and that those dimensions might not, that there will be tension between those different dimensions. You know, that they don't all sort of sit, you know, in perfect agreement with each other, and so forth. And so, what does it take then to sort of to hold all of that? You know, that's what I think really brings us to the heart of what it is that we're practicing. We're practicing the state of consciousness. We're practicing aligning ourselves with the deeper consciousness that already is holding all of that. You know, and that's the deeper consciousness that's mythologized in this beautiful, you know, tantric tradition as Shiva. It's this sort of selfless this consciousness that's beneath the self, beneath the psyche, and yet holds the memory of everything that ever happened, all of it. It holds it with sort of perfect equanimity, without pushing anything away, without trying to repress anything, simply, you know, generously, compassionately holding all of that experience. And so the way I see it, the way I understand what this, the way it's been taught to me, what this tradition is all about is aligning with that deeper selfless awareness, aligning with that source of compassion that allows us then to hold all of that experience, and therefore to, you know, have the possibility of sort of integrating it all into a sort of, you know, full, rich psyche.
That's so profound. It's almost like, you know, I think there are moments where when you're peeling off those layers of yourself, as you mentioned, which is a story that you've created in your head about how you are the protagonist, are there times when, I mean, there are times when you look at yourself and you're like, I don't think I can deal with what's coming up. um, how does one get into the comfort of seeing ourselves for what we thought was the opposite of what we see ourselves?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, you let go of the idea that it's going to be comfortable. You know, it's not comfortable. It's extremely unnerving, and yet there's a sort of there's a sweetness to that deeper awareness that's sort of holding all of this. You know, that awareness that's beneath the level of your conscious mind. That awareness is capable of sort of savoring, if you like, any, the rasa, the flavor of any emotion that comes into that field. And we connect with this sometime. I mean, this is not something extremely esoteric. It's not something unfamiliar, but you think of, if you sort of think back to a certain time of grief, say, as an example that's vivid for me, and I think back to times of like very intense grief, like, just after losing someone who's very dear to you. And there's an extraordinary agony there. There's also a clarity of consciousness in those moments. There's a certain awakeness that's sort of like you're so alive to your impermanence, so alive to your mortality, say. And you can very clearly see around you the ways in which most of us, most of the time, are not awake to that. That all becomes very vivid. And so there's a sort of vividness of awareness within that. And then there's also a certain kind of sweetness, in all that sadness. Almost a certain innocence. That the intensity of that kind of emotion, it's so complete and it's so heavy that it just sort of flattens you.
Yeah.
And so suddenly you're not sort of spinning, and like all of your neuroses are kind of put on idle. So there's and then there's something sweet about that. And you might not realize it in the moment. It might be sort of after the fact that you sort of look back on that and you think about that consciousness that you were in, and and you sort of, whether it's agony, grief, isolation, shame, whatever it might be, there's a certain sweetness there, and that sweetness is the deeper consciousness, just sort of savoring that, holding compassionately, kindly, sort of holding that suffering for you. The very idea is that is its fundamental nature, and so that is of course your fundamental nature, and that when you sort of feel into that, which you might not be doing in the moment, but my point is that if you sort of reflect back on it, you almost can go like, oh yeah, I was almost not even aware, in that moment that, like, in a certain sense, I wasn't alone. I felt so isolated, so agonized, and yet I was being held. I was being sort of witnessed, that something was holding space for me to have all of that experience. And that I wasn't really that suffering character. I was sort of this consciousness holding, this psyche that believed that it was that suffering character. It's almost like you can see that in memory. Sometimes you don't see that in the moment. So to become more aware of that, to become more awake to that, so that you do see it in the present moment, and that sort of you ritualize your life in observance of that deeper awareness and of that deep sort of generosity and compassion and kindness that is, within every human heart. This is the art that we're speaking about.
So I want to come to the next part, which is I want to understand what was that you went to Boulder to do a 1 month intensive with Richard Freeman and Mary Taylor, and as Richard Freeman says, it ruined your life, and you gave up an assistant professor position at University of Virginia to teach yoga full time. So what is it that drew you to Richard? And we have 20 minutes, so I'm going to try. I have so many questions, and I don't know which direction I'm going in. But there are two things that I want to ask you. Is your primary teacher has been Richard Freeman and Mary Taylor, but you've also practiced in Mysore. And I've read somewhere that you said that philosophy, doesn't allow you to be dogmatic. And in a practice like Ashtanga, how have the teaching styles differed from what you've practiced with different teachers, the two primary teachers in the Ashtanga world? How are their styles different, and what drew you and continues to draw you to Richard Freeman?
Hmm. That's a rich, yeah, so this is very rich. So, I mean, so when I first came to Boulder, I didn't know why I was coming. I, I had accepted a position as a tenure track position at University of Virginia, and which was extraordinary to me. I was very happy about that, and yet something wasn't sitting quite right. I mean, I really had, more and more um, was there was this sort of there was this contrast in these two areas of my life, in academia and in yoga, because I was like the guy who would never leave the yoga studio in the morning. So I was in there 3-4 hours every morning, and like I just wanted to be in there. And then my teacher asked me to start helping her with Mysore, and I was just like, this is so extraordinary. And I just wanted to do that all day.
This is at
um,
Charlottesville.
yeah, that was in Charlottesville. Yeah.
Okay.
But then my time was sort of, kind of drawing to a close there. It was kind of like, well, I'm about to, if I take I graduated, then I had a year as a postdoc. I had this great postdoc position um, at the Institute for this interdisciplinary institute called the Institute for Advanced Studies in Culture. And it was very stimulating because, I mean, the only thing I had to do was show up on Fridays for these talks, and they gave me an office, and I was able to really just write and read about yoga all day long. So that was amazing. And then that was over, and I accepted this position, but I was kind of aware that I was going to have to stop teaching yoga because, that's to take one of those tenure track positions, it's very heavy workload. And the pressures would be very high. I wouldn't be able to, practice and teach every day in the yoga studio, and I was not happy about that. I was just not really. I mean, I know people who thrive in the academic environment. Just a few. I've just met a handful of them. Most of them, my perception was that most of the people that I was surrounded by were very depressed. And very unhealthy, and that the academia itself, although I think that the university, that the kind of that universities are these great institutions of sort of self-reflection and like cultures reflecting on themselves, and I think it's extraordinary and beautiful, and I'm so grateful to have been able to participate for as long as I did, in that environment. But it was also, for me, it was toxic in a certain way, and I wasn't able to, like, alchemize that toxin. I wasn't. It just wasn't. I felt like I just remember a very distinctive. There was a certain point where I just that if I want to, if I want to really just follow this love that I have for yoga, I think I need to let this go. Because they're going to, for me personally, they're going to be in tension, and I'm not going to, And so I was kind of at this point where what should I do? And so and back then too, I should say that I didn't have a Facebook account. I'd never been on Instagram. I'd never seen it. I'd probably heard of it, but it just wasn't like a thing. So I didn't really know who was who in Ashtanga yoga. I didn't really care. My whole yoga world was just right there in Charlottesville, and the library at University of Virginia actually has this amazing yoga set. I mean, there's, in the stack, I mean, they have the biggest library south of DC.
Yeah.
And the yoga section was extraordinary. It's this huge, just this massive row of thousands upon thousands of old and mostly out of print yoga books. So, and as far as I could tell, I was the only one reading them. Yeah, so that was kind of my world. So, I had seen. So, anyways, I was spending a lot of time meditating in the Shenandoah Valley in the forest. I would go up there every afternoon, and I would just sit on this rock, and so I was sitting there one day, and it just came into my mind with this implacable force that I was going to Boulder. And Boulder had never been on my radar. I didn't know about Boulder. I didn't even know that Richard Freeman lived in Boulder. So I went back home and I thought, this is happening. I'm moving out of this house and I'm going to go to Boulder.
Wow.
And I didn't know why. So I got online and I started Googling around in Boulder. And at the time, I was like really interested in Ayurveda. So I was studying Ayurveda a lot. So I was like Googling like Boulder, Ayurveda. And so something came up. There are, of course, as you might imagine, you can study Ayurveda in Boulder. There are many programs. So I found this program and that must be the reason, So I signed up for this program and, 5 days later, I'd moved out of my house and gotten rid of my stuff. And I arrived in Boulder. And,
That's an incredible story of how you landed up in Boulder.
Yeah, so I arrived in Boulder and, right before I came, like the day before, I was like, I wonder if there's an Ashtanga program there.
And you had not heard of Richard Freeman till then?
I'd heard of Richard Freeman because my teacher was Richard Freeman's student.
Yeah, I read that, yeah. But
I was kind of confused.
Yeah.
I thought, because I knew she had studied in Boulder and that she had also studied in California a lot. So I kind of thought, like, I think Richard lives in California or whatever. And anyways, that was like back in the 80s. So, so this was 2012, when I came. I looked up like where I could practice yoga. And I arrived late at night, and I immediately, I took the cab from the Denver airport and blah, 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 and I showed up and went right to yoga. Because they were just starting the Ashtanga program, and so I was at the yoga workshop, and so I went to get a coffee first. This cafe down the street had just opened, and I talked to this really cool barista who's now my best friend in Boulder, and then I went down the street to the yoga studio, and I opened the door, and this girl was practicing, because you remember the old yoga workshop? There was no like sign-in room or no meet. Like you just open the door and you're in the practice space.
Yeah.
So I opened the door and there's this,
I'm getting goosebumps thinking of that.
this beautiful young woman practicing right there by the door, and she just stood up and goes, "Hey, I know you." And I was just speechless, and I looked at her because I didn't recognize her, and I thought, "Oh, hi," and then she looked kind of confused. I later understood that it was because she's a total introvert and she couldn't believe that she had just done that, and she didn't really realize, she didn't know why she had said that either. Anyways, that woman is my wife now. So anyways, so I stayed, and that woman who was my wife, Cheyenne, she drove me to, because I didn't say anything, and I practiced, and then I left, and I went to this cafe it's now gone, but this cafe that yoga workshop people used to go to called Espressoria across the street. And I went there and she was sitting there and she was like, oh, sorry about that. And we got into a conversation and then like, yeah, I'm going to this Ayurveda class in a couple hours. And she's like, where is it? And I told her, and she's like, oh, that's really far away. I should give you a ride. So she gave me a ride. And, anyways, I didn't connect with the teacher who was doing that Ayurveda class at all. So it was like from the first day I sat down and I was like, oh no, what have I done? I just, I thought, oh no, I'm crazy. I was just sitting there meditating and got this great idea in my head or something, like what? So I was like really pretty like, oh no, and kind of crestfallen, like I'm not going to continue through this program. It's kind of, it was okay. It was okay, but I was just realizing that like, no, I didn't come here for this. And then, in the meantime, I'm going to the yoga workshop every morning. So I met Mary, and of course, Mary's like the most likable person anyone's ever met. So of course, I think I adore her from day one. And then it slowly dawns on me that like, oh, she's Richard Freeman's wife. Oh, this is Richard Freeman's studio. How cool. Because I had seen videos of him practicing and, from very early on, those old videos,
Yeah.
those old Yoga Works videos
Yeah,
were like
Yoga
such
Works,
an
yeah.
inspiration to me. I was just like, wow, that's, because, I wasn't seeing anyone practicing like that, so I was watching those videos, just kind of seeing what was possible and just thinking like, wow, I want to be in that state of consciousness that guy is in. Whoever that is, who's that guy? Oh, that's Richard Freeman. Okay. Yeah, I want to feel that. Like I want to know that state of consciousness that he's in when he's doing that. Anyways, I told, so I was talking, I was like chit-chatting with Mary here and there, and about a week passed, and I told her, yeah, I came here for this Ayurveda thing, but it's not really working out. So, she's like, oh no, what are you going to do? And I don't know. I think, I'm really not sure. I rented this room for a month already. I mean, maybe I'll just stick around, and just practice with you guys. She said, oh, we have this month-long intensive happening on Monday. Let me talk to Richard. Let me see if maybe we can make space for you. He's like, okay.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, so then, 3 days later, that intensive starts, and it turns out that Cheyenne is in it too.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so it was extraordinary. And then
Yeah.
from the first time,
The
I heard
stars
Richard,
really aligned for you
yeah,
to
it was
ruin your
really a
life
moment
with
of
yoga.
extraordinary alignment.
Yeah.
I wish my whole life was like that, but it was just a very potent moment. And and then here, when I heard Richard, speaking about the practice, I mean, that was the main thing. It was like of course, he has this very beautiful presence, and the way he teaches asana, I was like really connecting with that. But it was so familiar to me because he was my teacher's teacher. So I was like,
Yeah,
it
you
all felt
resonated
very
with a lot of,
familiar.
yeah.
Yeah, very familiar. And then, but listening to him, listening to his philosophy lectures and his, this whole sort of way of, presenting the yoga but the way his mind works and the way that he was sort of capable of, holding so gently and so easily these different sort of competing ideas and perspectives, various philosophical ideas and perspectives, and really, self or no self kind of, thing, and sort of, inviting us to always sort of see, well, what's the common experience here, and how do you, how might, can you understand the way that a tradition of no self might have grown out of this kind of experience, or a tradition of, of that sort of celebrates the self beneath the self, the universal self. And are these really, are these really radically different ideas, or are they actually just different ways of expressing sort of different dimensions of a common contemplation? This I just thought was like, this is first rate, this is extraordinary. I fell in love with it, and I just resonated with something deep in my heart, resonated, with these two people, with Mary and Richard, and so I was drawn in, and I still am, I'm still here. uh, and I'm very glad. I'm very grateful for that. And I guess what I wanted to say then, and because I know we're coming up on just about 7 more minutes or something, but these kind of relationships that you have, with a teacher, it becomes with Richard and Mary, it quickly became not about like, well, here are these figures that know something that I want to know, and if I stick around long enough with them, I'm going to get this download of information, and I want all this information. I want all this information from them. I think when you first go to learn something from someone, like if you take a workshop or something, it's kind of like this. But it very quickly becomes something else. It very quickly becomes sort of like that the person starts to sort of represent something for you, and you start to represent something for them, so that it's mutually challenging. That you're sort of seeing something in them, some possibility, right? A certain noble quality that we all have. But you see it in them very vividly, and you sort of keep expecting them to live up to that. And they see that in you, Mm-hmm. And so you both sort of are sort of called by this sort of mutual recognition of something deep within your nature to be so much more than you are, and to move through life in a way that's more gracious, more open, more selfless, more giving, and this can be very difficult, it's not all easy, but it's extremely enriching, and so I think, with that said, it's sort of like with that there's something, how does that come about? I don't know. In Buddhism, they have this idea that when you have that kind of experience with someone, it's because you've had relationships with this person in past lives,
Mm.
and that that relationship keeps, because for karmic reasons, it sort of keeps reiterating itself in different lifetimes, and sort of and often they say you switch roles, like maybe in a former life, that whoever was the student was the teacher, and then it switches, and so there's this. That's a beautiful idea, because it sort of takes out of the bigger picture this idea that there's some hierarchy, or that one person is somehow, always the senior, or something like that. It's a very beautiful idea that they have in Buddhism. But in any case, there's something about that when that sort of happens to you, it's so, it's just like falling in love. That you fall in love with someone, you feel like you've known them somehow before, that you're going on, living out a story that began a long time ago. Like much further back than you can really.
It's like, I think you mentioned, we have only 2 minutes left, so I'm going to, I'm just going to wrap up by saying that I think you said, I want to see the world through his eyes. And I think that's, if I'm quoting you correctly.
Yes. Yeah, very nice. That's how I felt. And I will say that has changed and morphed in different ways. That was kind of the early expression, and that was my original kind of falling in love, and my relationship, with both Mary and Richard has become so multidimensional. Because for various reasons, so that has deepened and transformed and shifted, and sometimes become difficult, and but in the end, it's as rich as ever. And so for that reason, I don't, it's sort of no comparison for me to, or there's no point in making a comparison. Like,
Comparison,
what about
fair
other
enough.
teachers? It's like, I'm drowning in this relationship. So what about other teachers? I don't know. I hope other people are having that experience with whomever they are, communing with.
Thank you. That was beautiful. And I'm going to drag you into another one, because this has just been too short. It was beautiful and lovely to speak with you.
Thank you.
And
Very
thank
much.
you for taking time out. I know it's been really early in the morning, so I feel awful
Oh
about
no,
it.
it's no problem. It's no problem at all.
And I really
I love.
appreciate this. And I was actually going to ask you to chant because Deepika wanted you to chant. So can we close this on 5 seconds with you chanting?